Hello, students and viewers. This is again Professor Dr. Ahmed in order to discuss one English novel, Mill on the Floss, with veteran Professor Mohammad Ali Saab. I call him veteran because of his tremendous experience in reading fiction, literature, and in teaching the same as well. He has served very long in the Government Emerson College, which used to be called Government Boston Road College sometime also. He has spent number of years, two scores or three scores, I can't remember exactly what he spent there. And during his career, he made the people agree that he is one of the real veterans of English language and literature. And I'm really surprised the way he delivers lecture to the people. And most of the time, I have consulted and interviewed the students as well. They still remember him less as a man and more as a teacher. And his teaching style, many of the people have been copying. And frankly speaking, a few of his styles I have also been copying. And today, in order to discuss with him and get benefit from his skill and knowledge, I have invited on a special request that he should join us for the benefit of my students as well as for the benefit of all the viewers all around the world. Whoever love fiction, whoever love English literature, especially fiction or novel, that he should come up and share his views, valuable views with us. How does he feel about today's teaching, for example, teaching in the past, for example, and later on we shall be concentrating and specifying ourselves to the novel Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. So that much I could say about the introduction of Professor Muhammad Ali. I would invite him to add anything into his introduction which possibly I couldn't say. Please, sir, introduce yourself, sir.
Well, thank you very much, sir. The introduction that you gave was way beyond my deserving. I hope I will be able to live up to at least a quarter of it. It's always a pleasure to be with you. It's a privilege to be with you. And I'm very happy that we have some students with us. So I'm here, sir, at your service. I'm here.
Thank you, sir. Students and viewers, you see, English literature transported itself from England and spread all over the world, possibly because of colonialism. I'm not coming to the evils of colonialism. I would take the positive side because I have seen that English literature has contributed a lot in making the people more human or more humanity prone. That is the biggest function literature can perform. And fiction, although in 18th century and in 19th century and after that in the early 20th century also, it was believed that it is for the sake of women. Even if it is right, I am happy with that because women, half of the sky they are holding, and they have promoted this kind of reading, understanding, critical discussions on the fiction and on the novel. So that is why it is not worthless to talk about novel, talk about fiction. English fiction, though, provided a type of basis, but today we have lots of types of fictions in the name of post-colonial fictions. I'm the student of post-colonial fiction, so that is why I would like to refer that there is South Asian literature, Pakistani fiction, Indian fiction, Australian, and after that we can talk about Canadian as well as American fiction also. Wherever the colony was there, wherever the migration was there, post-colonialism is there. So, with the passage of time, fiction has been changing sides and places. For example, just recently, when 9/11 took place, there were new trends in fiction. Our students are familiar with Mohsen Hamid's novel, The Reluctant Fundamentalist. And dear students, if you just see that these days we are going through corona virus or the COVID-19 disease, as they call it, this is also a game changer, just like 9/11. Though in 9/11, USA, the biggest superpower, was able to take revenge on some parts of the world, but Corona or COVID-19 disease is not allowing anyone to do so. So it has its own dimensions, and there will be very soon many fictions on this type of isolation we are going through, on this type of education we are going through, and the kind of restrictions that we are to face these days. So in that, a number of pieces of fiction are there. And so, unless we go back to the origin of fiction, unless we go back to the Victorian novel where fiction is blooming, we cannot understand these phases very well. We cannot understand the kind of changes it has taken place. I think I should say that history is very much necessary in order to understand today. So that is why our discussion will be on English novel, specifically on Victorian novel. So I would first of all invite Professor Mohammad Ali to share his views on Victorian novel. With reference to Mill on the Floss, whether this novel is a true reflection of the society of that time, or it has ignored and neglected some part of it as far as the writer is concerned. Sir, please share your views on this topic.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. Now, from your own views, as you said, for example, you mentioned the importance of history. Now, whenever I speak to students, I am always aware of the fact that they have to appear in the exams. And they have to approach literature from a clinical point of view, because you can read literature for pleasure, that's a different thing altogether. You can read literature to form a moral point of view, and that is another thing altogether. But then you have to sometimes read literature simply to appear in the exams and to succeed. So I am going to speak from that point of view. Now, you just mentioned the importance of history. Oh, yes, certainly. Now, you said Victorian. Yes, certainly. This novel belongs to the Victorian age. What I want the students to be very, very attentive to is the fact that no age is a static phenomenon. Time continuously passes. Now, we can say, for example, that the Victorian age, it begins in like 1837 and this goes on to 1901. Now, that is a time which is passing by quickly. And society was changing very, very fast. For example, Mr. Tulliver, Maggie Tulliver's father, he is a person who belongs to what is known as the landed gentry. Now, the landed gentry were and are the people who are mostly upper middle class or a middle class who belong to the village. They own land over there and they have a certain social standing. Now, they are not feudal lords. Tom Tulliver's father, Jeremy Tulliver, was not a feudal lord, but he belonged to the landed gentry. Now, the landed gentry has its own standards, its own issues, its own problems. He was a landowner, a small landowner, and Tom Tulliver's father was also a mill owner. So he was a small industrialist and a small landlord. Believe me, all of the issues in the novel arise from this. That Mr. Tulliver and his son, and of course Maggie always comes in, that they belong to the village and they belong to the landed gentry. Now, as I said, people take a moral point of view also about this as to what did Maggie do and why did she do that. We'll come to that. We'll come to that later on. But I wanted to establish one thing, that this family belonged to the English landed gentry. Now, at the end, near the end, or let us say the last quarter of the Victorian era in which this novel was published. This novel was published in 1860. By that time, a big change had come in Europe. That change is now known, or still was, even then it was known as the Belle Epoque. The Belle Epoque means the beautiful era. Now, the beautiful era was where in Europe, which is very nearby England. In Europe, the arts had taken off, and very liberally. But England, being separate from the mainland, was still in its Victorian qualities. Now, you see that clash in the character of Maggie. Now, Maggie is a girl who is rooted in the landed gentry, but there is that thing going on in Europe called the Belle Epoque. Maggie also is an autobiographical portrayal of the writer herself. So, whenever we look at literature from a student's point of view, let us see two things. One, what was the era, and what was the transition? This, I believe, is the more important word. How was George Eliot's world changing? George Eliot's world was changing, that it was clinging to the vestiges of the Victorian era, which had its own moral obligations and very strict code. And at the other side, in Europe, there was a huge liberalization. So our writer is stuck in that, is got the tension in that, and so has Maggie. So now we go to the third word. The first word that I think important for students is to know the era, then to know the transition. What was the change going on? Now, if I just step aside for the moment and talk about today, that today everyone says we live in the postmodern era. We have to give it a name, but every day, sir, the world is changing. Every day. And then let's go back there now to the Victorian era. It was changing every day. It was not static. So the era was going through a transition, and the transition always brings tension. It actually creates tension. When we look at our younger generation today, even all the generations today, we have that kind of stress. It's a changing world. So we have to keep in mind the changing world. So whenever literature is studied by a student, they must look at the era, the transition. This is actually what I call, we use the word when. When did this happen? This novel was published in 1860, and the characters are living in Victorian England, which was a time of change. So this is the thing to remember. Now, if there's anything else that you would I like to ask, because this is where I begin, and actually what I have just said will connect later on with other things also.
Thank you very much, Professor Ali. I have a comment from one of your very favorite student, Abdul Rashid from Laya. He's a professor right now in Bahauddin Zakriya campus Laya, Bahadur campus Laya, and he's doing his PhD almost just about to complete. He says that when he used to be your student, he considered you cuckoo of Wordsworth sometime. And he says that he is the biggest fan of yours. So, sir, this is the reward a teacher gets. Very excellent indeed. Of course, the facts which you have described, these are very much relevant. For example, especially the transition which is going on, 18th century, then the start of 19th century, they were really very important with respect to the new changes with reference to, for example, Sigmund Freud, for example, or Darwin, Charles Darwin. These people were entering into the arena, and they were lending a new color to the life of the people, especially with respect to faith. The faith and the values which were permanently existing, but they were under danger because of these two philosophers. And so machinery and industry and industrialism, all these things are going to enter into the society. And my next question, I'm sorry, I'm saying question. I should say my next topic is that regarding Maggie, the heroine of this novel. She may be called heroine in the traditional sense or in the non-traditional sense, but she is a protagonist because she is the one who plays the most important role. Professor Mohammad Ali Sahab, just keep in context the Pakistani society also. And then the society of Victoria, Queen Victoria at that time, as you said, it was changing. The heroine is quite unusual. For example, she is the one who would try to challenge the established norms and values in order to, make the people feel that she's a human being and she needs to do something about herself. I mean, she was not willingly ready to accept the tradition which was established with reference to the girls. So, sir, what is your point of view on Maggie as a heroine? Was she a rebellious, a revolting person, or she is a prototype of the feminist women who come later on in the start of 20th century?
And with this is connected to the fact that when people say that Maggie was morally depraved and she actually broke the rules of society, these things do come up. So, the word heroine is one that I usually avoid. And the reason is that when I grew up, the movies that I watched, the heroines were quite different, you see. I mean, like they used to dance around and sing around and things like that. That word has now actually lost its original glory. And again, then it has some positive connotations, whereas all human beings have positive and negative sides to them. What I want to tell the students is that if we are going to study literature at this stage, at the stage that they are, they should actually not go and be judgmental in the moral sense. So let us not start thinking about whether Maggie was a good girl or a bad girl. This is one thing that we should keep in mind. It's not wrong to have a moral point of view, but one should have a moral point of view when one has reached a certain stage where one has all the data to be able to be judgmental. And when students are appearing in the exams, they should actually avoid that. Now, Was Maggie really, as I understood by your question, was she a good person or a bad person, or was she a modern woman, or as the feminists later came on? Well, sir, usually the thing is, in literature, labels are used, and the label feminist could be applied to Maggie. I would begin from the very simple fact that she is a human being driven by the conditions in which she is living. That is why I stressed when I began speaking was that when did these things happen? What was the era? Now, Maggie, as I said, was brought up by the landed gentry. They have certain rules and regulations concerning their honor, and honor is not to be taken lightly. My concept would be different, yours might be different, someone else's might be different, but everyone's honor is sacred. Now, Maggie, when she saw the honor code, let us begin by saying one thing. She actually succumbed to her brother's pressure and did not meet Philip Wickham. She stopped meeting Philip Wickham. So we must say one thing, that Maggie did compromise with all that was happening. And then later on, at a certain stage, she again succumbed to a temptation. Stephen Guest being a very good looking and very aptly named guest, because he just came in as a guest and he actually threw a spanner in the works. Now, Maggie is a human being subject to all the emotional shortcomings and issues that people have. So I would say that I have always taken Maggie Tulliver on a human level, just on a human level, and a product of the society in which she was born, the family in which she was brought up, and the situations that she had to face. But as people have to do these days, I certainly know that master's level and MPhil level, the students certainly have to apply some kind of theoretical framework, and feminism does come in. Feminism does come in. So I would say, simple as that, that if one is to apply Maggie, one is to apply the feminist model to Maggie, we should apply the first wave of feminism, simply where women actually began to assert themselves and to tell the men that we are also human beings just like you. I would not like to take her into the second wave and the third wave, because that would be a long thing. And we as students, I don't want them to be burdened by that. I just want to say Maggie was a human being who was actually subject to the conditions in which she was living. And it shouldn't go beyond that, really, I think, at this stage.
So very nice, Professor Muhammad Ali. Really, it's a very important point that moral bindings may be brought in, but should not be in case of literature by our young people, especially as you have pointed out. And instead of that, men may be sensitized about the position of women in their lives and her role, what she's doing. With respect to men, I remember that there are at least 4 men in that novel, Middle of Floss. 2 are connected to Maggie by blood, and 2 are connected to her by way of friendship or by way of love. But I think 4 of these people have not given her any happiness. All of these people have given her pain in one way or the other. The father, for example, all the time, he was worried that he should be in the house, he should not go to meet Philip. And same was the case with Tom, and Tom was very angry at that time, even when Stephen out with her. Only one man, who's a really very poor man, Bob Jacob, he used to be the source of happiness in her childhood also, and then so all these 4 men, they are not the source of inner comfort, or they have caused troubles in her life. Though sometimes we may say that Maggie herself is responsible for her tragedy, but as Aristotle would say that it's not the man or the person who is more responsible, it's the circumstance which is more responsible. So seen in this context, do you think that these men reflected in that novel, they were, are they not like patriarchs of our society even today? They resemble more much to that. They are representative of patriarchy. Is that the case? Can you say something about this?
Yes, there's another technical term now, patriarchy. These days, very fashionable, very much current. People use it a lot. And mostly these days, it's used as a slur word. For example, if a man is cruel or a system is bad or a woman suffers, then it is called the result of the patriarchal society. And I am addressing the students right now. I would like them to make a state of mind in which they should consider that these words, they are not necessarily bad or good. You see, a patriarchal system is just like a command, a system, a chain of command. Now, like say you're a principal these days, and you run a college, and you have to run it by a chain of command. So any institution, any organization needs that, and a family is also an organization. So as far as that is concerned, patriarchy is just fine. It's a system. But when the system becomes exploitative, then we can say that patriarchy is bad. Then we can say. Now the question arises that was Tom Tulliver exploitative of his sister? Was Mr. Tulliver exploitative of his daughter? Was Philip Wakeham exploitative of Maggie Tulliver? And did Stephen Guest exploit him? Because Bob Jakin is the angel. You see, we don't talk about him because he's good. He's just very good. So let's begin with the biggest culprit we usually see is actually Tom Tulliver, because Mr. Tulliver out of the game when he suffered that stroke and then he was bedridden. Now look at Tom. Give him the same kind of look that you give Maggie. He's a product of the conditions in which he's been brought up. Another point which I wanted to bring up was that this landed gentry were landholders, small landholders. Even in our culture, they say, and they say it in our language. And for people, if you who are listening, whose mother tongue is not that, I apologize. But I have heard people say in my society, that छोटे जमींदार का नक बहुत बड़ा होता है. People say that in Punjabi, which actually means that if his land holding is small, his ego will be very large. This is usually the case, I think, all over the world. Now, the Tulliver family was like that. And mind you, it was a hybrid family in the way that they were landowners and they were also very small industrialists because they had this mill. So an identity crisis, an unstated identity crisis was ongoing in that family. Now, then bring it to the next thing. Philip Wakeham's father, Lawyer Wakeham, I forget his real name, Lawyer Wakeham's a technocrat. There is always this clash between the landowner and the technocrat, the industrialist and the technocrat. There is always distrust between them. You see, because people think that the other people who earn by their wits and by what they say and speak, and sir, you that they are distrusted because they say that they can play with words, they can play with ideas, and so they are distrusted. Now, Tom Tulliver's father distrusted Lawyer Wakeham, and Tom Tulliver distrusted Philip Wakeham because of his inherited feud. So if he forbade his sister from meeting Philip Wakeham, I think that it can be put more in the category of the fact that there was this system working behind his thinking. It's not that he was deliberately exploitative or he was deliberately. And then later on, of course, when he refused to accept her, when she returned back from Stephen Guest, that we can say was one very short-sightedness on the part of a brother. It is understandable, but inexcusable. Yes, that's right. And Philip Wakeham, sir, I don't know as to where he actually exploited Maggie, because he liked her, he loved her, he desired her, whatever the reasons. We never delved too much into that. But he forced her to do nothing, just to meet him once again in the Red Heaps. That's about all. And and let's come to yes, Mr. Tulliver, the father. The father was always very understanding, sir. The father was very understanding. He loved his daughter. He did everything for her, everything that he could do. The only one thing is, I think, that he did not send her to the same school that he sent to Tom. But then you see that in those days, it was not done. So let us give the men the benefit of this much doubt that they were, victims of their own system. Bob Jakin, because Bob Jakin was in no way related to Maggie. So Jakin could afford to be what we would call now a modern man. But the other men...
Good men and bad men, they may say they are always there. Sometimes we have good men and sometimes... Yes, you are right in suggesting that it's a system which prepares, and it's a circumstance actually which prepares men to behave like that. And what I could find, the mill, which possibly Tulliver was very much proud of, and he thought that because of it, his position is there in the society. That mill became the source of conflict for him, the source of pain for him, and he had to fight with the world. And somebody has pointed out that on the financial, industrial, and one can say social level as well, it was the mill which was the cause of trouble for him, and actually the cause of trouble for whole of the family as well. And on the romantic level, they say it's the Maggie who's the cause of trouble for him. Leaving aside Maggie, because she is the heroine of a fiction, and so she has to be like that, as it happens in our Punjabi movies even, that a girl would always fall in love with the man who belongs to the opposite family or the family of the enemy. It has been happening. But the end in those movies is mostly that families unite. And as a result, I may not say a lot of bad thing in my mouth, that sometimes the girl and the boy both die. But if they survive, they unite the families. That's a different scenario in our area. But in case of Mill, this title of the novel is also Mill on the Floss. I mean, Floss is a river, that's right. But Mill, does the word mill relate this novel more with the industrialization which was about to take place or was taking place at that time, or it is just simply a title? What do you think that industrialism is also entering into the novel because of this mill thing, this because of this machine, which is included in the title of the novel?
Actually, the way you have pointed it out is very, very interesting. What I have seen is that the writers, they are very idiosyncratic, very eccentric when they name their novels and their stories. Sometimes very hard to get to the point as to why. But we can make our own associations, and no one is stopping us. And your association is very, very good. You see, the Floss happens to be a river passing through a village. The mill happens to be a symbol of the industrialization to come.
Yeah.
So this is very satisfying for me. This image that you make is very satisfying, because I honestly believe that it was a transition between the agricultural and the industrial states of England which were bringing about these tensions. Yes, sir. The title has this significance. As you point out, because George Eliot is not here to tell us as to why she called it that, and maybe had she been there, she wouldn't have been able to tell us the reason. But as a scholar, your interpretation is very interesting, sir. Yes, I agree with that. In fact, it enriches my knowledge about it. That's nice.
Thank you. I can. This is, it's a big honor for me that I can enrich the knowledge of a person like you. That's very great for me, and thank you very much for this comment. Well, one thing more that is all the time very significant with respect to this novel, the ending of the novel. This is deliberately made by George Eliot, that it should be tragedy-like. The protagonist should die in the end. Her death, the death of the protagonist in the end, makes her resemble with the folk tales of Asia, especially Pakistan and India. I mean, if you take the case of Heer Ranjha, the protagonists die. Though we love their tales and we always, remember them. Same was the case with other folk tales like even Arabian Majnun, Layla, etc. Everything happened like that. Was it necessary for George Eliot to make her heroine die? Because when you read the novel, occasionally we get certain indications that Maggie is going to die one day into the waters of River Floss. She will die into the water. The very first chapter, if you can recall it, first or the third, fourth chapter, there the writer makes the mom of Maggie say these words, that one day you are going to drown in water. And water was in the basket most of the time, and Maggie would drown her head and mouth, face into the water again and again when she was angry. So this was indicated in the very beginning. It was indicated that this thing can happen. Was it intentional? My second part of the question again relates to something else as well. If we watch certain videos which are made on this novel, some of the adapters have changed the ending of the novel by making Maggie survive. And at the end of the novel, they ride certain Tonga and then they meet Philip, or I don't know who they meet. And ultimately, it's the happy ending. Was it not possible for George Eliot to make a happy ending. For example, Maggie comes to save her brother. She comes there, calls him, and she rather risks her life. Was it necessary for George Eliot to make her heroine die? I mean, was she following Hardy? I mean, when Hardy is writing Everywhere Tragedy, and was she influenced by that? Or there was something else? For example, this didn't happen in her life. There was no one in her family who could have died like that. But even then, she forced herself to make this type of ending. What is your opinion about that?
Well, uh, the end in which both brother and sister die. Now, since you mentioned that this is foretold sometime in the beginning, also when her mother actually says that she's going to be found dead someday, she's going to fall in the river. Now, fiction writers, there was this short story writer called Frank Stockton. Frank Stockton once said that the best way to write a story is to begin from the end. If you don't know how you are going to end your story, better don't start it. In the same way, people who tutored me in music composition also said that if you can't understand how to end the composition, don't even begin it. So it is actually inevitable. What happens is that, let me give the analogy of a musical composition. When you listen to songs, you definitely hear those sounds in the end, which you heard in the beginning. This is actually the composer's way of bringing things into a round circle. Now, I have seen this technique in many novels, many novels. One of my most favorite novels is My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. You will, if you see that, that also begins like there are other also. I don't want to go into the details of those, but the thing is that even if it is foretold in the beginning, your question is actually, was it necessary to kill Maggie? But then you didn't ask me whether it was necessary to kill Tom or not, or are you partial to Maggie? Well, or should we say both? It could have been, a happy ending. It could have been that Tom would forgive Maggie, and then Maggie got married. Stephen Guest, for example.
Ideal thing.
Right now, but the thing is, should he, if it were a happy ending, should Maggie have married Stephen Guest, or should she have married Philip Wakeham, or should she have just been in harmony with her brother? What do you think? Which one of these would be a better ending? Any one of them could be a happy ending. Let us talk about that way. Sir, the fact of the matter is that writers, like musicians, music composers, composers use powerful sounds, and the writers, they exploit powerful feelings. Now, there was a time when the middle class was not so educated, the lower middle class is the middle class, and they were that the thing that could happen there was deaths. So when somebody wanted to end a tragic novel in a sad way, they would actually end it in death to give it a touch of finality. Now, later on, it was seen that human life became such that sometimes life worse than death. So our modern novelists mostly end novels where the protagonist or whoever keeps on living in whatever conditions they are living. That kind of alienation and marginalization is the tragedy. Whereas once, if there was any alienation or marginalization or any victimization, it was to be shown in the form of death. And I take this novel in this way, that it is the story arc shows the birth, the climax, and the death of all emotions. So physical death, I think, was necessary. And I would like to wind this answer up by saying one thing. I have always seen this novel as a love story. A love story between a daughter and a father, a sister and a brother. Philip and Stephen Guest, they are simply there as ancillary products, or let us say in our language, they look at answer. They are just like that. The
Extra
love story
characters.
between father and daughter, and brother and sister.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Mohammad Ali. One last question on my side. Many students are putting questions, and the questions which they are putting, I have mainly put to you. But again, I will see if there is some different question. We will be discussing that as well. But just one little thought of yours is required on the river Floss. Some people say that this river Floss has been taken as a symbol. I mean, it's a symbol of the world as the life runs like that. Do you think that this is right interpretation of the river Floss as a symbol to be the world or to be the life? And if it is right, what do you think about this? It's right, or it should be interpreted in a different light?
Anything can and should be interpreted in as many different ways as are possible. There should be what I say an artistic integrity made. For example, the river, any river, a river flows. So you can take the flow and apply it to anything. Flow, for example, the flow of life, the flow of emotions, because there is in this novel a mention somewhere where the emotions rose so high that they rose like a river which rises in flood and leaves its marks. The writer herself has said. So as far as the writer is concerned, she has certainly showed on two occasions the river as the flow of emotions. One when she said that the tide as it rose, and the other is when Maggie was carried away with Stephen in the boat. This is very symbolic of emotions where they had no control over the flow of the river. Now that is what has been suggested by reading the novel itself. But the river can be like anything. As I said, life, death, because rivers all flow towards the sea. And one of my friends recently he put a post on Facebook. It was in Urdu that मर्द औरत दरिया और किनारे की तरह होते हैं और इकट्ठे ही चलते हैं, things like that. And I was thinking चलते तो हैं कि जा समुद्र में रुलते हैं, वो एक लहरा. I was thinking that way. So it can be taken that way. And I'm now actually telling the students, if you can argue your point about the symbol, make it any symbol.
Yes.
The only that your sentences should be well constructed, grammatically correct, your spelling should be okay. Make any kind of argument, it's all an open field. It can symbolize anything.
It's been very great. Some of the students have put a question and they have commented as well. And they have named you to answer their question. Probably they don't believe in me. And they are saying that the guest should be put the question. Very briefly, please answer these questions. There is a student, he says that why did George Eliot start the novel from the childhood of Maggie? Why she couldn't start it from the very age when she's quite young? Why she starts from the very childhood? This is the question for you.
Yes, yes. That's a good question, certainly a good question. It was always a genuine question as to why did the writer start from this very stage? Now, I believe that in this case, because there is one thing quite sure that this is an autobiographical novel, certainly an autobiographical novel, and the most searing memories that we ever have of our childhood. And because she wanted to depict her own childhood, the way she came through it, in fact, maybe she wanted to express, now I'm talking about George Eliot, maybe she wanted to express what she had been through and had become what she had become. So therefore, she showed her protagonist from the childhood. This is
That's
what
nice. Sheikh Talha, another student, says that was it obligatory in the Victorian age that a sister should obey the brother?
that a sister should
Obey. If a brother says no, she should say no. If brother says yes, she should follow him.
No, sir, it was not obligatory in the Victorian age. No, it was not. It is just it's a power relation. Wherever there's a powerful relationship, it will dominate the powerless relationship. So it was not obligatory during the Victorian age. No, not at all. Not in England that I know of. That I can say that because I'm familiar with that. It's not that I was there then at that time, but it's just that because I've read so much about it. No, it's not that. This was not the Victorian values which were asserting themselves. This was the landed gentry values.
I may add one thing to that, which confirms your answer, which testifies that Tulliver's own sister had married 30, 40 years before the story with her own will. And even he mentions somewhere that I tried to stop her, that she shouldn't marry, but she married. So in that way, English women were pretty free and independent in case of their choice of husband. So it was not the case at all. One of the student has put a number of questions for you, but I would take only one from his. He's put 4 to 5 questions. But one of the important question that I am going to put here is that he says that this examination point of view question, I think, that we want the advice of Professor Ali. We have 3 novels in our syllabus, and Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice, and then we have here many other novels. I forget another one, George Eliot's novel, of course. They say that which novel is more important with respect to examination point of view?
You just named 2 of them. For example,
Yeah.
we are talking about The Mill on the Floss,
I
and then
think
you said
the third one
Pride and
is
Prejudice.
A Tale of Two Cities. A Tale of Two Cities by Dickens.
I see. Tale of Two Cities. Now, which one is from examination point of view? I would
Which
like
one?
a little clarification on this. Which one would be easier to attempt in the examination, or which one would impress the examiner? What does our student want to know?
I think the student always want to read the mind of the examiner. I mean, which novel will attract his more attention in order to put more questions from that side into the examination?
Well, what I have seen is that if the examiner is a lady, then the novel which would be
You are a good
strategically
reader of ladies as
better,
well.
Pride and Prejudice.
Okay.
If the examiner is a male, then we go
Yeah.
with Mill on the Floss. And if we are not sure of the gender, then we go with the Tale of Two Cities.
Okay, that's nice. Students, I think you have heard the answer very clear. So you need to find out first of all whether the paper setter is a male or is a female. Okay. Sir, one question is here from Pakistani boy. Possibly name is something else, and he is given in title Pakistani boy. He says, according to some of the people's, Lucy is the heroine of the novel. Lucy is the heroine of the novel. Whether it is right, Lucy.
We are talking about the Mill on the
Milan the Floss.
Floss.
Yes, Milan the Floss, Lucy, cousin of Maggie.
Well, I'd like to tell the questioner that let us now stop using the word hero and heroine, because
Okay.
these are meaning words. Let us just say protagonist.
Protagonist.
Now,
Yes.
if our student over there is not clear about the word protagonist, let me just make it clear that the protagonist is the person through which the writer is constructing the whole story. And let us keep it at that way. Let's not talk about heroines. These are human beings, sir. Now, when someone is exceptionally outstanding in some positive way, we say that he is a hero or she is a heroine. And since novels about ordinary people like you and me, let us even forget about this word. Let us say Shah Rukh Khan to hero hai and heroine ko bana le apne shauq ki. Lekin when you talk about novels, let's not use these words anymore.
Okay. Professor, we have the GR of the class, Mehdiya Batul. She has put a question why it was necessary that only a river should be chosen to end the novel. Why not some other place to end the novel? Was it necessary that water should cause the death?
Oh yes, sir. This is a very good question, because you see, the novel begins with the river, the novel ends with the river. This is sometimes what writers call the internal symmetry of the construction. It's the same way, as I said, a song is made. And this is, again, I think that the writer was very conscious of the fact that she would show the river as a flow. So it begins with the river, it ends with the river, and it also ends due to the river, because when the river was diverted, the mill actually went out of function. Oh yes, it gives it a certain beauty. The writer could have ended it, a person like me, not very good at writing, would have ended it in a different way. But just look at the beautiful symmetry which the writer has put, that she actually makes the river all sorts of happiness and well-being, then she makes it all sorts of misery, and then she makes it the end of everything. This river ends in the huge sea of eternity. Yes.
So, Professor Sahab, thank you very much. You have answered number of questions of my students, and you have satisfied each and every question. That's a great thing about you. And something good is happening here. People are commenting on our discussion also, and this commentary will be saved on YouTube whenever you want to watch, or these people want to see this commentary is available. I have seen that number of watchers has ranged maximum to 30 sometime going down as well. But this video will be available on YouTube, so everyone can repeat it, can watch it, and can get benefit out of that. I hope this session has gone very, very well, because Professor Muhammad Ali has explored each and every aspect of the novel, and he has prepared us to fall more in love with the novel. And as a result, if you are in love with your books, students, you can prepare them better. So learn to love your books also. I know you love many things else, but the books are also the things which deserve your love. And coming back to Professor Muhammad Ali Sahab, I am personally, as the principal of that college, as the professor and head of department of that college, on behalf of my college and my students, I'm very much obliged to you for your kind consideration, for giving time, and for speaking so eloquently on this novel. It has been a very pleasing moment for all the students of English language and literature to listen to you. Some of the students have revived their memories when they were listening to you. They have commented very interestingly. Hopefully, you will be able to find these comments also. I am all obliged to you, sir. When the session is closing, we would request you to close the session by sharing your own ideas about all the session.
Well, the teaching profession, is that what you want me to do, sir? Talk about our profession?
No, the kind of talk we have had today.
The session that we had, the session.
Today.
Oh, sure. Yes, sir. Certainly. Very shortly, because, sir, it was, as I said in the beginning, and now I can confirm that, it's a very big pleasure for me to be here with all of you. And it was a privilege to be able to give my opinions on certain matters about which, of course, like all human beings, I have my own shortcomings and defects. And I would actually appeal to you and to all viewers and listeners that wherever they think that I am open to correction, I will welcome all kinds of criticism. And thank you very much, sir. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We shall be keeping on good terms with you, because we want to invite you again and again in order to give benefit to the students. As I expected, the great benefit has come to my students. Thank you very much. Sir, by the way, we are going offline. So this is the last second now. Okay, sir. That's it from me. Students and viewers, it has been a great chance to talk with Professor Muhammad Ali and get a lot of benefit out of his discussion. I shall keep on joining my friends on this forum so that my students can have variety of opinion. I teach you people, but I think I'm not that perfect as many other professors in this profession can be. So that is why I invited Professor Muhammad Ali. Next time I have many other people in my mind to invite them and to let you people have their views on this forum as well. I hope you have enjoyed it. And I think any of the viewers, any of the students, whoever has enjoyed, understood anything, do not forget to click the subscribe button. After getting a great benefit, at least do this thing. Subscribe to my channel so that we can have maximum number of viewers. Still 100 are required. Every one of you is duty bound to do that. Nothing else is being claimed from you. So thank you all. This is the time to say you goodbye. And here this talk closes.